What would you do if someone in power publicly humiliated you, mocked your dreams, and tried to crush every ounce of potential you had? This is the story of Calvin Washington, a bright 16-year-old from Eastside Heights who lived in a cramped apartment where every dollar was carefully stretched by his hard-working father, James Washington, a dedicated bus driver whose long shifts barely paid the bills. Calvin's world was small but full of big ideas. In his dim bedroom lit by a single worn lamp, he transformed every scrap of discarded technology into parts for his innovative projects. His notebook, filled with circuit diagrams and scribbled ideas, was his treasure and his tool for building a future that so many told him he would never have. Calvin's journey began on a rainy evening when the soft patter of raindrops on the thin windows mirrored the persistent tapping of his pencil on paper. Outside his door, his father's weary voice called from the hallway, reminding him that school awaited him in the morning. "Calvin, you still working on those ideas? Get some rest now, son," his father would say with a gentle firmness that belied his exhaustion. Even though every night was a struggle, Calvin's heart burned with a desire to prove himself, to show the world that his humble beginnings did not define his destiny. He dreamed of a day when his work would no longer be dismissed as the ramblings of a poor kid, but celebrated as the spark of genuine innovation. That day, a challenge was announced at Westridge High, the prestigious school where Calvin earned a scholarship despite his modest background. The Innovation Challenge promised a $5,000 scholarship and connections with top tech professionals. For Calvin, whose ideas were born from the resilience of a community that helped each other when the system failed them, this was a chance to be seen as more than just a charity case. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. The competition favored students from the affluent North Side who had access to the latest technology, private tutors, and state-of-the-art labs. Calvin's project, an app called Community designed to bridge the gap between resource-rich institutions and underserved neighborhoods, was a labor of love, born from years of struggle and observation. On the day of the challenge, the grandeur of Westridge High was a daily reminder of the two worlds colliding under one roof. As Calvin stepped into the gleaming corridors, he could not help but notice the polished posters featuring last year's winners, students whose privileged backgrounds had given them a head start in life. He walked past these symbols of iniquity with a mix of determination and quiet sorrow, knowing that every step he took was a battle against a system that saw him as less than. In the hallways, the whispers of exclusion and thinly veiled snickers about his background stung deeply, and his heart pounded not just with nerves, but with a rising fury at the injustice that had become his everyday reality. Calvin's trials did not stop at mere whispers. In the computer lab, where outdated equipment was his only lifeline, he managed to carve out a few precious minutes to work on his code. His beloved teacher, Ms. Chen, offered him silent support with a nod as she lent him a computer that no one else wanted. 30 minutes today, Calvin," she'd say softly, her tone both encouraging and heavy with the understanding of his struggle. Meanwhile, students like Sarah Williams, daughters of tech executives with the newest MacBooks, enjoyed access to state-of-the-art technology and an ease that seemed to mock his very existence. Even when Principal Harrington, an imperious figure with impeccably styled blonde hair and a tailored designer suit, made her rounds in the lab, her cold, dismissive gaze confirmed that Calvin was nothing more than a token scholarship student in her eyes. The tension between Calvin and Principal Harrington had deep roots that went far beyond mere academic competition. Her disdain was laced with an unspoken prejudice, a bias that favored the wealthy and the privileged, while condemning anyone who did not fit her narrow view of excellence. During the challenge's preliminary rounds, she ridiculed Calvin's work in front of the entire auditorium. With a voice that dripped with contempt, she asked, "Mr. Washington, where is your working prototype?" Her tone was not one of concern, but of cruel amusement, as if his failure was an inevitable consequence of his background and circumstances. Though Calvin tried to explain that his hardware had failed the night before, his words were cut short by her mocking laughter. She claimed that excellence demanded resources and sophistication, qualities that in her eyes, Calvin could never possess. Even as his classmates presented sleek, polished projects, applications for luxury shopping and high-tech smart home systems, Calvin's modest poster boards and handwritten notes stood as a testament to his resilience and ingenuity. His prototype existed only as fragmented code stored on a flash drive, but the idea behind community was profound. It was born from a deep empathy for a community that had long been neglected by a system rigged in favor of the elite. Every whispered insult from the audience, every dismissive remark from Principal Harrington, and every sneer from the likes of Jason Whitfield, the son of the city's top real estate mogul, stoked the fires of his determination. Their laughter was not just at his expense, but a glaring reminder of a society steeped in classism and racial discrimination. In the midst of his humiliation, a spark of hope emerged. Ms. Chen, who had seen the potential in Calvin from the beginning, sent him a message about a tech program at the community center on Elm. Though the program had its limitations, old computers, 2-hour sessions, and outdated software, it represented a lifeline, a chance to keep his dream alive. That evening, as Calvin sat on the fire escape watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the city skyline, he allowed himself a brief moment of optimism. The cool night air and the distant hum of the city reminded him that the world was bigger than the walls of Westridge High. But with every passing day, the weight of discrimination, both subtle and overt, grew heavier on his shoulders. The following morning, a new obstacle was introduced. Principal Harrington, in an effort to maintain her control, announced that all projects in the Innovation Challenge had to be developed using personal resources or under strict supervision during faculty-approved sessions. This new rule was clearly designed to squeeze every last bit of hope out of students like Calvin, who already struggled to make ends meet. The supervision sessions were scheduled at times that clashed with his responsibilities at home, where he had to help watch over his young cousin so that his aunt could work the night shift. His best friend Damon tried to offer a glimmer of optimism by suggesting that his cousin's tech store might be discarding some old computers. But even that small chance was marred by the looming presence of the administration's oppression. By the time the preliminary showcase arrived in the school gymnasium, transformed with professional lighting and display tables that shone like the trappings of a corporate expo, Calvin felt the full force of the two worlds colliding. His station, a rickety card table in a neglected corner, stood in stark contrast to the polished setups of his peers. Despite the technical failure of the computer he had salvaged, Calvin clung to the hope that his idea would speak for itself. When his moment came on stage, the harsh spotlight revealed every imperfection of his poster boards and every flaw in the handwritten sections of his presentation. His voice, though steady, betrayed the pain of humiliation as he explained how community would revolutionize resource sharing in underserved neighborhoods. Just as he reached the heart of his explanation, Principal Harrington's voice cut through the silence of the gymnasium with a dismissive sneer. She demanded proof of a working prototype and belittled him in front of judges and parents alike, branding his project as a mere excuse for lack of proper preparation and resources. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. In that humiliating instant, Calvin's heart sank as he realized that the system was not only designed to favor the wealthy, but to actively crush the spirit of those who dared to dream differently. The echoes of Principal Harrington's words reverberated in his ears as his father's worried eyes met his from the audience. Ms. Chen stood by him, her own eyes burning with unspoken fury and empathy for the boy who had so much potential, yet so few opportunities. That day, as the final bell rang and the gymnasium emptied of its spectators, Calvin's mind raced with thoughts of revenge. A fierce, righteous counterattack that would one day expose the deep-seated injustice and cruelty of the establishment that had treated him so unfairly. Even in the depths of despair, Calvin vowed that this humiliation would not define him. Instead, it would be the catalyst for a revolution, one that would shatter the walls of discrimination and expose the hypocrisy of a system that prized wealth over true innovation and talent. His dream of community was far from over. It was only gathering strength in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge and make those who had scorned him sit up in astonishment. And so, with every painful word and every cutting remark, Calvin Washington's resolve grew stronger, setting the stage for an epic comeback that would leave everyone saying, "Now that is something to behold." Calvin Washington's heart pounded as Principal Victoria Harrington's sharp voice cut him off mid-sentence. He had barely begun to explain the inner workings of his community app when she sneered that he was given the same instructions as everyone else and clearly wasn't prepared. Laughter erupted from the well-heeled parents and their privileged children in the audience, a cruel chorus of disdain that left Calvin feeling small and exposed. Even Sarah Williams, who had earlier displayed a hint of amusement, now watched with wide, pained eyes, her expression mixing disbelief with a tender pity. "Thank you, Mr. Washington. That will be all," she said softly, words that echoed in the suddenly too quiet auditorium. Calvin's hands trembled as he gathered his scattered materials. Each piece he clutched was a symbol of his struggle, every scribble a testament to nights spent huddled over a battered desk under the dim glow of a single lamp. As he left the stage, the cold echo of Harrington's dismissal still rang in his ears. She strutted before the crowd and declared, "Let's have a round of applause for all our serious competitors today. Finalists will be announced tomorrow, and they'll have 3 more weeks to perfect their projects for the final showcase." The emphasis on the word serious was as unmistakable as it was cruel, a reminder that, in her eyes, Calvin was merely a charity case, undeserving of genuine recognition. In that humiliating moment, a silent vow ignited within Calvin. Not only would he complete his project, but he would create something so undeniably brilliant that even Principal Harrington could no longer dismiss him with a laugh. That very day, as he packed up his fragile poster boards, his best friend Damon approached him quietly. "That was messed up, man. She had no right," Damon said, his tone low and filled with anger. Calvin's eyes, glistening with a mix of frustration and determination, met Damon's as he murmured, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Later, as the weight of the day pressed down on him, Ms. Chen, his steadfast mentor, stepped forward. Her voice, gentle yet resolute, promised, "Calvin, I want to talk to you about some alternative arrangements for your project." For the first time that day, a spark of hope ignited inside him. The path ahead would be riddled with obstacles and steeped in injustice, but Calvin was more determined than ever to prove that those who scorned him could never crush the fire within him. He wasn't fighting solely for his own recognition. He was battling for every student who had ever been dismissed for not fitting someone else's narrow definition of excellence. That weekend, Calvin found himself sitting at a battered kitchen table in the modest apartment he shared with his father. His father's weathered hand rested on his shoulder, the calluses from years of labor a silent testament to the sacrifices made for Calvin's future. "Son, I might not understand all that happened today, but I know you were treated unfairly," his father said in a husky, determined tone. Calvin's voice trembled as he confessed, "Dad, I need a better computer to finish this project." "But even the cheapest new laptop costs too much right now," his father interrupted, firm yet tender. "Calvin, no. You know, when your mother passed away, she made me promise that nothing, no hardship, would ever dim your light. Whatever you need, we'll find a way." On Monday morning, before the first period, Ms. Chen intercepted Calvin in the hall. She explained, "The community center's tech program didn't work out. Their computers couldn't handle your code architecture. Meet me after school." That afternoon, Ms. Chen led him down a quiet corridor to a forgotten room adjacent to the computer lab. "This is the old server room," she said, unlocking the door to reveal a dusty space filled with outdated equipment, relics of a bygone era that the administration had long since abandoned. "Nobody uses it since the upgrade. It's not much, but there's a working desktop in here. I want you to focus on your project, and if Principal Harrington finds out, let me worry about Victoria Harrington. You concentrate on your work." She handed him a key, a small lifeline in the midst of a tempest of opposition. That very night, as Calvin sat in the silence of the server room, his phone buzzed with a message. From Sarah Williams. "That wasn't cool what happened at the showcase. What exactly are you trying to build?" The unexpected concern from someone who had once been a bystander sparked something in him. He replied hesitantly, "I'm building an app that connects people with resources to those in need." His words hovered in the digital space for a moment before 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. A silent conversation of hope in a world that so often dismissed him. The next day, Damon took it upon himself to spread the word among a small, trusted group of students who had grown tired of Principal Harrington's elitism. Before long, a covert network began to form. Jamal from the robotics club offered spare components. Zoe shared her premium coding software license, and Tyler, whose mother worked at a local tech company, lent a development toolkit. In one of their secret gatherings in the dim server room, Calvin warned them, "We need to be careful. If Harrington finds out about this, she'll use every rule in her book to shut us down." Damon, ever the optimist despite the risk, countered, "This isn't just about your project anymore. It's about proving that you don't need deep pockets or a privileged background to make a difference." The group's eyes shone with resolve, and in that moment Calvin realized he was no longer alone. A week into these clandestine sessions, a breakthrough came in an unexpected form. One afternoon, as Calvin wrestled with lines of stubborn code, his father appeared with a refurbished laptop cradled in his arms. "It's not new," his father admitted, "but the guy at the shop said it can handle coding." Calvin's heart sank as he asked, "Dad, how did you afford this?" His father looked away, his eyes heavy with the burden of sacrifice. "I sold my watch, the one your grandfather gave me." The words stung like a bittersweet reminder of what had been sacrificed for his future, and Calvin felt both immense gratitude and profound sorrow. His father's selfless act only deepened his determination to succeed. The underground support network continued to flourish. Even Ms. Chen's colleagues who had quietly suffered under Harrington's oppressive policies began to pitch in. Mr. Washington from the engineering department offered technical advice, while Mrs. Porter from the business division helped Calvin refine his presentation strategy. Each contribution, no matter how small, wove a tapestry of resistance against a system that had long favored the wealthy and discriminated against those who came from humble beginnings. Calvin's project was rapidly evolving into a symbol of hope and defiance, a bold statement that innovation and brilliance were not the sole province of the elite. Late one evening, as Calvin was leaving the secret server room after another long coding session, he nearly collided with a janitor pushing his cart. The old man paused, offering him a knowing wink and a soft, encouraging remark. "Keep working, son. We've been waiting a long time to see someone stand up to that woman." Those few words lit a renewed fire in Calvin's heart. He understood that every ounce of pain, every moment of humiliation, was slowly coalescing into a force powerful enough to shatter the chains of discrimination and elitism that had held him back for so long. Despite the support of his underground network, the road to the Innovation Challenge finals was far from smooth. 2 weeks before the final showcase, frustration gnawed at Calvin. His app's core algorithm, intended to create a seamless network of resource sharing, kept crashing during simulations, the connections between providers and recipients failing to hold under pressure. "I'm missing something fundamental," he muttered to himself, eyes fixed on the tangled lines of code that blurred together. Damon, who sat idly nearby in their secret workspace, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe you're overthinking it," he suggested, his voice gentle yet laced with urgency. "What was your original inspiration again?" Calvin leaned back, recalling the story of the local grocery store that had closed down last year, and how Miss Rivera from apartment 3B had stepped in to coordinate rides and supplies for neighbors in need. He remembered his mother, who used to meticulously track every neighbor's need in a worn notebook, always ready with a ladder, a warm meal, or a helping hand. That recollection struck him like a bolt of lightning, and with a sudden clarity, Calvin realized he had been focused too much on efficiency and not enough on the human element, the trust and relationships that truly bound communities together. Energized by this insight, Calvin's fingers danced across the keyboard as he restructured his algorithm. He integrated trust metrics and relationship strength into the matching process, ensuring that every interaction would build stronger, more resilient community bonds. Hour after hour, he labored into the night, barely noticing the passage of time, until the first light of dawn crept through the small window of the server room. When the simulation finally ran successfully, Calvin barely dared to believe his eyes. The visualization on the screen resembled a living, pulsing network, with resources flowing like lifeblood through the veins of a revitalized community. "It works," he whispered in astonishment, a mix of relief and triumph washing over him. That very afternoon, an unexpected visitor appeared at the door of the secret server room. It was Sarah Williams, standing awkwardly in the doorway with an expression that was both uncertain and resolute. "I heard you might be here," she said hesitantly. "I want to see what you're working on." Calvin's initial suspicion was tempered by her soft tone, and though he hesitated, he decided to show her the working prototype. As he explained every detail, the concept, the struggles, and the breakthrough, the atmosphere in the cramped room shifted. Sarah's face transformed from reserved politeness to genuine enthusiasm. "This is truly amazing," she admitted, her eyes shining with newfound respect. "You're not just creating an app. You're building a new kind of social infrastructure." Calvin, his voice steadier now despite the lingering sting of past humiliations, replied, "That won't matter if I can't present it properly." Before he could respond further, the door slammed open. Principal Victoria Harrington stormed in, her face flushed with a fury that could freeze blood. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her gaze darting threateningly between Calvin and Sarah. "This area is restricted." In a calm yet defiant tone, Sarah stepped forward and explained, "We're collaborating on a project, Principal Harrington." The tension in the room thickened as Harrington's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Miss Williams, I wouldn't expect you to be involved in unauthorized activities," she snapped. "This room is off limits, and Mr. Washington was specifically denied advancement to the final showcase." Just then, Ms. Chen emerged from behind the principal with an air of quiet authority. "The judges' vote sheets clearly show that Calvin received enough scores to qualify as a finalist," she stated firmly. "Only his score prevented his advancement." For a moment, the room fell into a heavy, suspended silence as Harrington's eyes flickered with calculated anger. "Fine," she finally seethed, her voice tight and measured. "Mr. Washington may participate in the finals, but this unauthorized use of school property ends immediately. And Ms. Chen, expect a formal review of your conduct." With that, Harrington stormed out of the room, leaving behind a charged atmosphere of defiance and uncertainty. Calvin's gaze locked with Miss Chen's, and she whispered, "You shouldn't have risked your job like that." Calvin replied softly, "Some things are worth fighting for." Miss Chen's parting words, "Now you have 2 weeks to perfect that project. Make them count," resonated deeply within him. With Sarah's unexpected alliance and Ms. Chen's unwavering support, Calvin now faced the finals with a renewed sense of purpose and a mission that had grown beyond his personal ambitions. The day of the Innovation Challenge finals arrived, charged with an electric atmosphere that was both inspiring and intimidating. The school auditorium had been transformed into a professional exhibition space, complete with rows of chairs filled by tech industry representatives, local media, and board members. Finalists hustled backstage, making last-minute adjustments to their presentations, while Calvin stood at his assigned table, a far cry from the neglected corner of the preliminary showcase. Although his setup was modest compared to the polished displays of his affluent peers, his repaired laptop hummed reliably beside a professional display that Sarah had designed with care. The screen showcased a simulation of his app, Community, as it connected resources across a detailed map of their city, its vibrant lines and pulsing nodes symbolizing hope in the face of oppression. As the final 5 minutes ticked away before the doors opened, a student volunteer announced the upcoming start of the presentations. Calvin took a deep breath, wiping his sweaty palms on his worn pants. He adjusted the tie he had borrowed from his father, now paired with a crisp pressed shirt he'd gotten from Miss Chen's son, and looked every bit the serious competitor he had become, even though his financial means had not changed. The tension was palpable as he awaited his turn, the memory of every sneer, every dismissive remark, and every sacrifice fueling his determination to succeed. In that charged moment, as the lights dimmed and the spotlight found him once again, Calvin Washington was no longer the overlooked scholarship student of Eastside Heights. He was a symbol of resilience, a fighter who had turned humiliation into a weapon of change. And though he had come so far amid a system steeped in elitism and racial prejudice, his eyes shone with the promise of retribution. A retribution that would make even the most hardened critics sit up and take notice. His journey, marked by every harsh word and every act of cruelty from Principal Harrington, had evolved into an epic struggle against injustice, one that was about to culminate in a moment of reckoning that would leave everyone, especially those who had once laughed at him, utterly astonished. Calvin began his presentation with a steady, measured voice, describing how community wasn't just a technological solution, but a movement, a digital lifeline designed to bridge the gap between the resource-rich and the underserved. He spoke of trust, relationships, and the deep-seated need for a society where every individual's potential was recognized, regardless of their background. As he detailed the app's groundbreaking algorithm, which factored in not just efficiency but the strength of community bonds, a hush fell over the auditorium. His words resonated with the quiet dignity of someone who had endured more than his fair share of injustice, yet had risen above it with unwavering resolve. By the time Calvin concluded his presentation, even the previously skeptical faces in the crowd had softened, replaced by expressions of admiration and, for some, a dawning recognition of the truth in his words. The applause that erupted was tentative at first, then gradually transformed into a thunderous ovation, a resounding repudiation of the elitist attitudes that had long been allowed to flourish at Westridge High. In that moment, it wasn't just about winning an innovation challenge. It was about challenging a system steeped in discrimination and cruelty, and about showing that true excellence isn't measured by the size of one's bank account or the privileges of one's background. As Calvin stepped down from the stage, the weight of years of injustice and prejudice seemed to lift just a little. He exchanged glances with Sarah, whose smile now brimmed with genuine pride, and with Damon, whose eyes shone with unspoken solidarity. And though Principal Harrington's shadow still loomed over the institution, the tide had undeniably begun to turn. Calvin Washington's journey was far from over, but on that day he had not only silenced his detractors, he had ignited a spark that promised to blaze into a full-scale revolution. A revolution of opportunity, equality, and respect, one that would one day force even the most entrenched figures of power to acknowledge the brilliance and resilience of those they had long sought to belittle. In the days that followed, whispers of Calvin's triumph spread far beyond the walls of Westridge High. Community groups, local leaders, and even disillusioned teachers began to rally around the idea that innovation and excellence could and should transcend socioeconomic barriers. For many, his success was a balm for years of neglect and discrimination, a sign that the system might finally be forced to reckon with its own inherent injustices. And for Calvin, every step forward was both a victory and a promise that one day those who had once laughed at him would be forced to confront the reality that true genius is never confined by the limits of privilege or the cruel dictates of an unjust system. Calvin Washington's story, marked by hardship and sacrifice, had now become a beacon of hope. It was a story told in whispered tones among those who had once felt voiceless. A story that urged every overlooked soul to rise, to fight, and to claim their rightful place in a world that had long underestimated them. And as he continued to refine his project, preparing for the next phase of the finals, with the support of his newfound allies, Calvin knew that his journey was about more than just an app. It was about rewriting the rules of the game, challenging every notion of inequality, and ultimately delivering a response so magnificent that even those who had once reveled in his humiliation would be forced to stand in awe. Calvin Washington felt a surge of hope as his underground crew gave him a fist bump. In that modest, dusty room, students and supportive staff gathered around him. Even the janitor gave a subtle thumbs up. Then Principal Victoria Harrington swept in with a cold, calculated look. "Mr. Washington, I see you pulled something together. I expect community to impress the judges," she said with a thin smile, belittling him. She whispered that the competition rewards excellence, not charity cases, a cruel reminder of her prejudice. As Calvin rehearsed his pitch, the judges approached. Suddenly, his laptop screen flickered and went black. He scrambled to fix it, knowing someone might be sabotaging him. Despite the setback, Calvin boldly offered a personal tour of community using printed materials. His passionate explanation of how the app connects those in need stirred the crowd. When judges later asked questions, enthusiasm replaced doubt. Even as Principal Harrington glared disapprovingly, Calvin stood proud, his resilience shining through. That moment left him with a fist bump from a loyal friend and a promise of victory over a system steeped in cruelty and discrimination. Calvin's courage was a testament to hope and determination. His triumph inspired every heart. Calvin Washington's triumph reached its apex when his mentor, Elijah Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Technologies, stepped forward with an offer that would change his destiny. Reynolds, a proud son of Southside, recognized that Calvin's innovative app solved problems even his own engineers had long struggled with. In a modest conference room at Westridge High, Reynolds declared, "Your algorithm strengthens human bonds and transforms communities." At that moment, Principal Victoria Harrington, desperate to salvage her reputation, attempted to claim a role as Calvin's mentor. Her calculated lies and self-serving narrative crumbled in the face of overwhelming evidence of Calvin's brilliance and the support of a loyal underground network. Reynolds presented Calvin with a generous investment, personal mentorship, and full autonomy over his vision. Meanwhile, an investigation into Harrington's biased resource allocation led to her demotion, exposing years of discrimination and cruelty. Now a celebrated CEO with a company valued at $12 million, Calvin returned to his alma mater to launch the Community Innovation Lab, a state-of-the-art facility for underrepresented students. His journey proved that true innovation arises from struggle, and that even those once oppressed can transform adversity into a legacy of empowerment, inspiring countless others along the way, indeed.